This is the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Chris.
When you think of spiritual disciplines, you probably think of reading your Bible, praying, fasting, or something along those lines. But there's an important spiritual discipline that I think we all miss more often than we like to admit. Gratitude changes your perspective on life. It puts God in His place as creator and provider, and it puts you in your proper place as created and receiver. Learning to live a life of gratitude can be a powerful spiritual discipline in your journey to grow daily. When you measure yourself and compare your own performance to the performance of others, or to some unreasonable expectation that you have of yourself, gratitude is the key to getting out of that. And in this chapter, Gretchen talks about the power of gratitude in her journey to escape perfectionism. With that understanding, how do spiritual disciplines help us grow through opportunities like this?
Well, I came upon a practice really by accident that has been a profound influence in helping me gain ground in these areas and in perfectionism specifically, because a perfectionist, I would say I'm an optimist as I look at other people, but as I look at myself, the cup isn't even half empty, it's mostly empty, Mm-hmm. So I would tend to enter into the Lord's presence with prayer time, and I would start my prayer time like this: oh Lord, like just disgusted with myself. Like, why am I not doing better? Why am I not more patient with the kids or loving toward my husband or whatever? It's just a million things. And so I can remember a few years ago, I read Ann Voskamp's book, 1,000 Gifts. And so she talked about a gratitude journal. So I began to use a gratitude journal, and I use it first thing when I wake up in the morning. I go get my coffee, and as I'm drinking that first cup of coffee, I get my journal out, and I just number it. I keep a year's numbers for 1 year, and then January 1st, I start the next year with number 1 again. And so each day, I don't sit down to write a certain amount. I just think back to the previous day on what God has already done that was good and right, whatever was excellent or praiseworthy, sort of like that Philippians 4 passage. Mm-hmm. So I start my gratitude journal, and I just do bullet points, 1,132, the less humid day yesterday, 1,133, Kyle's kind text to me, and I just think back to the previous day. What were my gifts? What were blessings? And so that ended up changing actually my prayer time, because instead of focusing on what was wrong with me or our family or with life in general, I began to enter the Lord's presence with thanksgiving, because God used that gratitude journal to change me from the inside out on my perspective. I began to hone in and focus on what was good and right, not what was wrong. So I began to see the more I praised and worshiped the Lord, and the more I was more mindful of what He had done, then the less I needed to feel bad about measuring myself, or the less I felt bad on how others did not meet my expectations, because I was focusing on the people that were exceeding my expectations and who God did have in my life that loved me and supported me, and the things that He had given me to do that He was blessing. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great, because especially when God pairs that with a dark night of the soul where He does that stripping away and kind of leaves you humbled in His presence, you couple that with gratitude and thanksgiving, and I think that's where the Spirit sweet spot is in our lives, where He wants us to be.
Mm-hmm. And I think, back to my point about measuring, actually, you beat me to it, but I think journaling is one of the best forms of actually measuring our spiritual lives, for the reasons that you gave, right? It's not a look towards ourselves, it's not us condemning ourselves, but it's a record. It becomes a record of what the Lord has done in our lives. And so we get to look back over that and see, oh, I was struggling with this at that time, or I was thankful for this at that time because, I had just come through, this season, or, God had really, his providence was at work in this area of my life. And so I think it's a great way of measuring ourselves without us being the ones that are doing the measuring.
Because it's for the purpose of Thanksgiving.
Good point. Are we measuring ourselves, or are we measuring God?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think back into the Word, what does he say a lot in the Old Testament? He keeps coming to the Israelites saying, remember, remember. And how did they keep messing up? They kept forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so in our flesh, our tendency is to forget what God has done and hone in on what he has yet to do. And I can remember when our oldest was in 8th grade, our kids came through a private Christian school in Tallahassee. And our oldest has a learning disability. And so it was always difficult for him to make it through that school because it was an honors-based curriculum. And when they got to high school, we knew we were going to switch them over to the public school to just let them have a little dose of the real world before they left our home to go to college. And so that 8th grade year, as our son was struggling, I was wringing my hands and I was worrying. I was like, Lord, how is he ever going to make it through high school? We don't know anybody in that public school. They're not Christians over there. They're not going to love him. How is he ever going to make it through? And I just fretted, and the Lord just stopped me in my tracks, and he just imparted in my mind these thoughts. Gretchen, why do you worry over what I will or will not do tomorrow instead of thanking me for what I've already done for Bryce? Mm-hmm. Has he not made it through all of these years without even an F or a D? Mm-hmm. Has he not made it? Have I not supported him and he has done just fine? Was it easy? No, but he had made it through. Why don't you spend more time thanking me for what I've already done, worrying about what I may or may not do in the future? Then fast forward to Bryce's senior year, and our kids are close in age. So his senior year, his younger sister was a junior and his younger brother was a freshman. So they were all three in high school together. And his senior year, there was one semester where Bryce was on the honor roll, but the other two weren't. And when I got that paper home, when Bryce handed me that, don't you know that the Lord immediately brought back to mind that 8th grade year with me wringing my hands, worrying, because worry is a wasted emotion. It is feeling bad over what hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. And God knew how Bryce was going to do in high school. I just didn't know it. But it really showed up in my unbelief. Worry revealed my unbelief and my lack of trust in God.
Gretchen, I totally agree with you. Thanks for sharing that story. We so often like to think of ourselves as in control of our lives and what happens in our lives. And in reality, we forget that God is really the one who's in control of everything. And he takes care of us far better than we could ever take care of ourselves. And so instead of worrying, like you've said, the answer is gratitude. Be thankful. God is a great provider. He takes care of us. He loves us, and he loves to do those things for us. And it really is, like you said, just a matter of trust. We don't trust God when we worry. And gratitude, I think, is the key to getting out of that. And that's why gratitude is a great spiritual discipline.
Hey guys, Chris here from Daily Growth Discipleship. And I just wanted to take a minute and tell you about one of the most important spiritual disciplines I think you should be engaged with. And that's the discipline of journaling. Now, for some people, journaling seems to be that skill that you either love it or you hate it. And for a long time, I was the kind of guy that wanted to do it, but I hated actually writing. And that's because I never could seem to be consistent with it, or I would be staring at the blank page with nothing to write. But I knew journaling had a lot of really good benefits, and I wanted to enjoy those. But two things that I think are the most important aspects of journaling that have really helped me be able to stay consistent with that. Number one, I think journaling helps you see what God is doing in your life. as you sort of write down the rhythms and routines of the day, you can look back over your journal months or even years later and see how God was at work in your life. The other thing that I love about it is it causes you to pause for a moment and listen to God. One of the things we often are all looking for is how to hear the voice of God more in our lives. And when we condition ourselves to stop every morning, every evening, and say, God, what do you want me to be for the day? We begin to learn to tune into his presence and listen for his voice. And believe it or not, all of that can come through the simple discipline of journaling. And with the Daily Growth Journal, it only takes 5 to 10 minutes. There are just 6 questions each day that are targeted at specific areas that will help you grow in the Christian life. So if you guys haven't checked that out, Daily Growth Journal, you need to go and check it out. But regardless, please begin this important discipline of journaling to see what God is doing in your life.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. If you want to stay up to date with all that's happening on Daily Growth, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Be sure to check out the next chapter in our conversation with Gretchen, where she talks about what it means to follow hard after God.